Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Welcome back to Business Innovators Radio. I'm your host, Frank Falker. My guest today is Dr. Virginia Colin, Director of Colin Family Mediation Group in Springfield, Virginia, and author of The Guide to Low-Cost Divorce in Virginia. Dr. Colin, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's funny, your firm's motto is, we help family members stop fighting, solve problems, and stay out of court. I think that very much says it all. It really succinctly sums up the value that you provide to your clients. But what are some of the specific advantages of using a mediator like yourself to negotiate a divorce?
There are several. A big one is that if you work with a mediator, you maintain control of the decisions. You're not turning it over to somebody else to tell you how to run your family.
Who might you be turning over these decisions to if you were not using it?
Perhaps a family court judge.
Okay. So what you're saying is that if we don't use a mediator, and let's sort of pose it, what's the normal course of negotiating a divorce if someone is not using a mediator?
Well, there are two. Many people, more people than you would think these days, try as hard as they can to handle their divorce completely on their own without involving mediators or lawyers or other professionals. Mm-hmm. The more traditional course is for each spouse to hire an attorney, and then the attorneys will set things up either to negotiate with each other and try to get to a settlement that the husband and wife can both live with, or to actually get ready to fight with each other in court and present contradictory evidence about what's been going on and what should happen next.
And so if we have those two initial choices that divorcing couples could make, try to work it out themselves, or go the more traditional route and let the lawyers fight it out. And then it sounds like there's another branch in the choice tree there, which is we couldn't get it worked out between the lawyers before we went to court, so now we're going to court. And now we're where you were talking about, where decisions may well, and in fact will, be taken out of your hands and put in the hands of a judge. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I should mention there are also other things that can be tried. There's collaborative law. I won't carry on with all the alternatives that are available.
Okay. And so coming back to your motto, we help family members stop fighting, solve problems, and stay out of court. How do you do that?
Instead of hiring two lawyers to help them fight with each other, what people are doing when they come to us is hiring one mediator to help them work out a solution to whatever problem they're addressing.
I love that. That's great. Wonderful.
You asked me earlier, what are the advantages? And I only got to one of them.
Okay. Well, you stopped speaking. And so I really felt that it needed some additional explanation when you just said,
okay.
Instead of letting somebody else make the decisions, well, it kind of begged the question, who's that somebody?
Right. Okay.
So please go ahead. What are the additional advantages?
Time, money, feelings, and a time in a different way, and what happens later. So time. Working in mediation, people can often get to the outcome they want to get to in only 2 to 6 meetings. And it can be done in a matter of days or weeks. If you go the lawyers and court route, it ordinarily takes close to a year. If you really wind up in court, definitely more than a year to get it all settled. So if you want to have it settled quickly and move on with your life, then mediation is a better choice.
I love that.
Mediation is hugely less expensive than paying lawyers to help you work things out in the courts. As mentioned, you're paying one mediator instead of paying 2 lawyers for every hour of progress. Mm-hmm. Lawyers' hourly rates tend to be higher than mediators' hourly rates. And you pay not only for the time that the lawyers are talking to each other about where they might work out a settlement, but you're paying for the time when you talk to your lawyer. So it uses a lot more hours, and the hours are more expensive.
Can you give me an idea? It's like half the cost, a third the cost of lawyers to work with a mediator generally?
We can usually get people to settlement for under $3,000.
Wow.
Typically, if you have lawyers, each party will spend $10,000 to $30,000. And some people wind up with each party paying a lawyer more than $100,000.
Wow. Yeah, that doesn't sound out of the realm of possibility at all.
It sounds crazy to me.
Well, you see it every day. So I'm sure it's more real to you.
Yeah, couldn't your family use that money? Wouldn't you like to keep it for the kids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So were there additional advantages that you were going to touch on?
As I mentioned earlier, what happens with feelings for the members of the family can be very different if you go the mediation route versus the lawyers and courts route. Mediators will listen well and give you a chance to talk about how all this feels, but they're not going to make it worse. They're going to help you keep your distress to a minimum so that you can focus on making a plan for the future so everybody in the family comes out okay. And really the opposite often happens when you hire attorneys. An attorney's job is to vigorously represent the client's interest. And one way to do that is to be as nasty as possible to the other spouse. Usually it's like lawyers add fuel to the fire if there's already a lot of anger and a lot of anxiety in the couple that's separating. So you end up with a lot more anxiety, depression, and hostility when you're working with lawyers. There are good lawyers who don't make that happen, but there are a lot of lawyers who do make that happen. And of course, while you're fighting with each other, your kids are living in the war zone that you're making. So it saves a lot of emotional anguish for everybody if you work things out in mediation.
Yeah, it sounds such a clear choice to make when you're faced with these options. Is it possible that sometimes people don't want to choose to use your services? They'd rather fight through their mouthpiece because they are afraid of the conflict or the direct conversation with their spouse in a room with you. They'd rather let somebody else yell at he or she through their lawyer.
It does happen. It happens that there are people who would just rather be nasty to their ex-spouse than work things out constructively. And it happens that there are people who are fearful, but we can help them. In an extreme case, we can meet separately with husband and wife and carry communications back and forth to help them work things out if you're scared to be in the same room, or you'll give in too easily if you're in the same room with your spouse. And sometimes we can work with people being present in the same room. It's something we've practiced, helping the person who feels like they have less power in the relationship, helping that person to be heard, and remembering that person always has the power to say, no, I won't settle that way.
It's interesting. I guess, like myself, many of the people listening to us may never have even heard of this as an option or a profession or a resource available to divorcing couples. For those who are aware of using a mediator to negotiate a divorce, what do you think are some of the biggest myths or misconceptions they have about making that choice?
Usually the problem is that they've just never heard of mediation. Sometimes the problem is some lawyer has told them, don't bother working with a mediator. You're just going to need a lawyer to do everything for you in the end anyhow. There are lawyers who actively steer their clients away from mediators because it leaves more business for the lawyers.
Sure.
I think I lost a piece of your question.
Well, no, that's pretty much it. Why would someone choose not to move forward? I mean, to me personally, as a divorced person, everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like a wonderful service to offer. You get through the process faster. It costs less money. There's less emotional destruction. It's easier on the kids. So I guess what I'm really asking, why is it that sometimes people say, no, I'm not going to go that direction. We're either going to work it out ourselves or fight it out in court. We're not going to use a mediator. Why would somebody say that?
Work it out yourselves is a good path to go for some folks. Some people really can work out everything or almost everything on their own. And then they just need maybe one meeting with a mediator to work out the last details that they couldn't settle on their own, or they just need a lawyer to write up what they have decided. So I've got no problem with work it out on your own. Deciding to go to court just seems irrational to me if there's no reason you couldn't mediate.
You just brought up something that occurs to me. You said work it out on your own and then go to a lawyer to, get it memorialized in writing. Do you guys put together the agreements, or does that still need to be done by a lawyer?
No, we write the agreements for our clients. And when a mediator is writing it, the mediator is not acting as an attorney for either party. Mm-hmm. What we're doing is acting as scriveners. We take what the two people involved decided, and we put that in a written agreement for them. Interesting.
Is that the legal term, scrivener?
It actually is.
That's great.
It's to be really clear that a mediator is not practicing law when he or she is mediating.
It's very interesting to me. I'm so glad we had a chance to talk about this.
And in Virginia, there's explicit authorization in the law for mediators to write these agreements, as long as we're acting as scriveners, not throwing in stuff of our own like lawyers would do.
Interesting. I'm glad you brought that up as far as the Commonwealth of Virginia. You and I are both in Virginia. Your name is Virginia. And your book says Divorce in Virginia. Are you able to mediate for people outside of the Commonwealth of Virginia, or is your practice exclusive for citizens of Virginia?
I would be able to mediate relationship issues and co-parenting decisions for people who are outside of Virginia, unless they need to work out something that really has to be brought to a court to be enforced.
I see.
In that situation, your local state, the state that you're in is likely the state law that applies, and laws differ a lot from state to state. So I do only Virginia cases if we're heading for court, even for court, just to incorporate the mediated agreement into a court order. If you're going to wind up in court, then it's good to go with a mediator who knows state law where you are.
That makes perfect sense. Now, you just mentioned something else. What other types of relationship issues are you able to help mediate for people?
We do a lot of work with parents who were not married to each other, but have a child. And they need to figure out, how does this child get to stay connected and have a good relationship with each parent? And what, if anything, do they want to do about child support? So that's a big one. Family mediators are also available to help with almost any kind of conflict that would come up in a family. Inheritance disputes, estate planning, family business succession, and even just relationships. Sometimes we work with somebody who has an adult child who hasn't spoken to them for 6 years. And maybe if they can all talk to the mediator, then the mediator will be able to help them be able to talk with each other. And we help people reconnect.
It's fascinating. Can you give me an example, obviously without mentioning any names or giving any information that would be something that would identify somebody, of a relationship that might have been in real big trouble, or a divorce that was careening off a cliff, that you were able to help, and what the beneficial outcome was?
Yeah, there was a couple I worked with early on who had already been in and out of court several times over a period of 3 years, arguing about a temporary custody order or spousal support or whatever. And everything had broken down, but they did have lawyers available. So they got to a point where they either needed to work it out in mediation pretty darn soon, or they were going to have to pay their lawyers to prepare for trial. And they decided to give mediation a shot. And there was a lot of anger in that couple, more from one party than the other. But they both wanted a good outcome for the kids, and they both believed that the other person was very capable of being a good parent. No matter how mad I am at you, you're a good mom or a good dad. So we just took it one step at a time, and we managed to work everything out. They decided on a co-parenting schedule. They decided what to do about spousal support, decided what to do about child support, decided how to divide up the assets and debts, and really beautifully figured out a way that there would be enough money and enough love in each household.
That's wonderful. I love that story, and you told it very well. Now let me make it a little more mercenary. Compared to the money they'd spent and the time they'd invested in their previous attempts at negotiating a settlement with lawyers versus when they came to you, how much time did they spend with the time and money with the lawyers, and how much, you don't have to say time, a specific amount of money, but perhaps a ratio of the amount of money they spent with you?
I'm not sure that I asked them how much they had already paid their lawyers. If I did, I probably wouldn't remember right now. But based on the number of times they'd been in and out of court, I would guess it was probably in the range of $10,000 to $20,000. Could have been more, but I hope not. And then they didn't break any patterns, so I'm sure that the work that I did for them cost less than $3,000. It might have been less than $2,000.
And how long did it take to get it worked out with you, and how long had they been fighting with the lawyers?
They'd been off and on fighting, using lawyers to help them fight, for about 3 years. Working with me, it only took about 4 weeks, but I did have the advantage that if they didn't work it out with me in 4 weeks or 5 weeks, then they were going to have to go to trial.
Yeah, that's good.
It's not really a fair comparison.
Right. They sort of had a gun to their heads, but also I imagine you had an advantage because they'd already been going through this for all this time, and they knew,
right,
where their positions were. But nonetheless.
And they knew how bad it was being in court, so they were very motivated to avoid needing to do that again.
Interesting. Virginia, what originally inspired you to become a mediator?
It was almost an accident. I had a friend late in the 1990s who was in a custody battle with his ex-wife, and that battle had been going on for more than a year and a half. And they kept being another reason to go back to court and reconsider, go back to court and get the judge to reconsider. The kids at that point were living with their dad, who was my friend, and the mom sincerely thought they would be much better off living with her. So she was fighting to make that happen, which is a very understandable thing for a distressed mother to do. But the point is, they've been fighting for a year and a half, and they had a court hearing, and the judge told them to do what the guardian ad litem had recommended. A guardian ad litem is a lawyer appointed to represent what is best for the children. Okay. Not necessarily what the children want, but what, after thorough checking around, the lawyer thinks is best for the kids. So the guardian ad litem made a recommendation. The judge said, that sounds good. You, mom and dad, go home and do that. And neither parent thought it was a good idea. Obviously, they were going to be back in court again. So I said, wait a minute. I've been a Quaker for a number of years now. a lot of Quakers learn conflict resolution skills. Would you like to try working with me, and I'll use what I learned about conflict resolution, and maybe you can figure this out together instead of going back and talking to the judge again? And they both said, yeah, let's try that. Which is really impressive because, one party was my friend. You might expect me to somehow take that person's side. And in the role of mediator, you really have to work the best you can equally for both people. So it was impressive that this mom was willing to trust me with that.
Yeah.
And it was long and hard. These two were really, really angry at each other. I mean, just the level of rage that popped its head up now and then was off the charts. So I did that whole thing by shuttle mediation. I never had them in the same room at the same time because there'd just be an explosion and you wouldn't make any progress.
Yeah.
And it was long and hard and very stressful, but in the end, they got to an agreement about a parenting schedule that they could both live with. They could both accept. So the ex-wife wrote it up as a consent order. By then, she'd been representing herself for a long time, and she'd learned a lot about law. So she wrote it up. I didn't in this case. And they both signed it and sent it off to the judge. And judge probably heaved a big sigh of relief. Oh, good. I won't have to see these folks again, at least not for a while, and signed off on it. So they were ordered to do what they had agreed to do, which is the usual outcome of mediation if somebody wants the decisions to be registered with a court. The court just incorporates your agreement and orders you to do what you said you wanted to do. And the awesome thing was that these folks never went back to court. Those kids.
About that. That's very interesting.
The kids are adults now, and there was never another court hearing about anything.
Oh, that's great. I love that outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't need to change the schedule or think some more about child support or anything. They made it work. Once they had developed an agreement that they created, then they made it work. They did have fights now and then about trading weekends or whatever.
Yeah.
But nothing that really got crazy.
That's great. Well,
that's really one of the other advantages of mediation that I didn't matter. When people are in mediation, they're learning how to cooperate with each other to be parents together raising their children, or parents apart, but somehow a respectful team raising their children. So going through mediation, you end up with parents who have a good chance of being able to cooperate in raising their kids from that point forward. Going with lawyers and courtrooms, you sometimes end up with long-term resentment and bitterness or long-term anger. And it gets in the way of letting the other party be a good parent to your kids.
That's just really great stuff. And I'd love to speak to you all day about this. I had no idea I was going to be so fascinated by your work. But we're just about out of time. And before we go, I want to make sure people who are listening and have a question for you or would like to reach out and get more information from you know how to do that. What's the if someone wants to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, you could start by visiting our website, which is Colin Family Mediation Group.com. Colin has one L and no S. It's just COLIN. And there you can get acquainted with how we think about things if you like doing a little bit of reading on the internet. And then my phone number and my email address are there, and I can say them now too. I kind of prefer for the initial contact to be by email because that way I recognize people's names correctly. Sometimes hearing it on the phone, you're not sure whether it was Victoria or Virginia or Regina.
So what is the right email address?
mediatorq@gmail.com.
And the Q is for Quaker?
The Q is for Quaker, yes.
That's great. I wanted to go all the way down that rabbit warren with you about the connection between being a Quaker and being a mediator, but we always have to be considerate of our listeners' time. One last question I want to ask you, and I'll let you go. If someone does reach out to you by email, what can they expect to happen next?
They can expect a response within 24 hours, sometimes within 2 hours. And if they ask me to phone them, then the response will be to schedule a phone call. And if they just ask a couple of questions that they'd like to have answered, then I can answer them by email.
Wonderful. Before we go, I want to remind everyone listening that Dr. Virginia Colin's book, The Guide to Low-Cost Divorce in Virginia, is available as both a paperback and a Kindle book on Amazon.com. Well, Dr. Virginia Colin, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Dr. Colin, and thank you for joining us. Until next time, I'm Frank Felker.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.